welcome back to another in my series of nightclub photography videos. So this tutorial is well, it's not really a tutorial, it's basically how I go about editing my nightclub photography images. Now, I use Lightroom, I use a whole host of software, so I use Capture One, I use Lightroom, I use Photoshop, and all together they give you sort of like the complete solution. But for event photography, I do truly think that Lightroom is probably the best bit of software out there. So what I initially do is import all of the images into Lightroom, and then we can start working from them. So we then move into the Develop tab. Now, a lot of event photographers will have presets that they work from, and I used to have presets, but I tend to now, it takes me a little bit longer, but I tend to just basically edit on the fly. So I look at each of the images individually and edit them, and that takes a little bit more time, but the reality is I'm doing less and less event work now, just through choice. So I only shoot for a few events, so just through choice I choose to do that. So I've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of how I edit it. Now, if I'm taking a series of images, such as, say for instance, this image here, and they're all relatively the same sort of lighting setup, the settings that I use for one I can then use for the other. So for instance, this guy here, what I'll tend to look at is I'll increase the exposure, of course. I will then look at increasing the clarity, just makes it a little bit sharper, which is good, makes everything stand out just a wee bit, which is very useful. And the great thing with that is as you pull the clarity up, you can also reduce the noise, but you don't want to do this too much because everything just becomes really soft. So if you look at that now, it's too soft. You do want to keep some level of texture. So I'll tend to do noise reduction around about 10, so we've still got a little bit of grain. And then I'll look at my shadows. So I'll pull my shadows up slightly. And I always try to go for sort of a moodier look, if that makes sense. So a lot of my pictures will be very similar in terms of like the mood, and there's not much, it's not sort of like a perfectly exposed image, and I think that mood adds to the drama sort of on the night. Then what I tend to do is I like to add a little bit of colour. So I find that if there's blue spotlights, giving it a little bit of a blue tinge throughout will make it stand out a little bit more. And then if we look at, if we look at before and after, you can kind of see the effects that I'm having, and that works typically for my sort of style, and that's the sort of image I will always go for. Now, if I shoot a cleaner image, such as this one here, now what we've got going on here is we have a flash over in the corner, so a remote flash firing down through the crowd, so we create a silhouette, but then I also have a flash this side, just holding off of the camera, which is obviously exposing this side of the DJ, so we can see him, and we can also see that. If we compare that to the last image that we tweaked, we only have one light source. So you can see we're having one light source, a little bit more drama, a little bit more mood. There's a moment where he's shaking a punter's hand, that's why we sort of took that picture. But if we move back to this one here, where we've got sort of like the background light and we've got this light here, again, the first thing I'm always looking to do is just play around with the clarity and the exposure. Now that's going to blow stuff out. That's going to blow stuff out. So it's going to blow stuff out. So we don't want to go too high basically, so you just want to pull that down there. Actually, it's probably a bit too high. So I would say there, my clarity's up, that's good. It's still kind of sharp, but I find it's just not got enough to it. It doesn't say enough. So what I'll tend to look at doing is a little bit of vibrance to bring it to life, wee bit of saturation, and then play with the contrast. So by doing that, we should create a little bit more separation and maybe pull that down and play with the highlights slightly. And the great thing is, because we've got this flash over in the back, we can obviously manipulate the colours. So if I wanted to warm it up, I could do that. But what I probably always like to do is I just like to cool it, give it either sort of a purple or a greeny tinge, because we've got all this green netting at the top. I think green obviously complements it quite well. Not too much that we affect the DJ's arm and turn him totally green, but just enough so we've got some sort of ambient light there. So it just looks a little bit more popping. So there we go. If we look at before and then we look at after. Now, for instance, if I was happy with that and I move to the next image, I can then just go develop settings, paste from previous, and it's going to obviously use those same settings. Now what I'll tend to do with this is, if you have a little look, there's a lot of pictures that are the same sort of composition, And the reason being is I'm looking for sort of the money maker, so to speak. So I'll shoot a lot of images in the same sort of setup, and then there'll be one in there that I like the most, or I feel sort of is the best one. I think it's probably this one or that one there. So the rest will get deleted basically in that series. And that's kind of what I do on an individual basis for each of the images. So this is the first one, flash didn't fire because we weren't set up properly. You can see that there's nothing going on there, so that goes straight in the bin. Then we've got some sort of crowd stuff, and this is flash, sort of the flash is firing off here, so off camera flash just to illuminate a bit of the crowd. We've still got some in darkness, got some hands in the air. This is just about capturing the moment, so to speak, a bit of energy in the club. So again, we play with our clarity, probably vibrance, and this lady here has got blonde hair, so I know the highlights are going to blow, so I want to probably pull that down a little bit and increase the saturation and play the shadows just a tad. So that kind of is like one of the images there. It's got a little bit of a feel to it. People are dancing, having fun. You can see there's a whole range of these ones, and again I take them because I'm looking for the best one. That one's out of focus, so it goes in the bin. This one, she's sort of making a bit too much direct eye contact with the camera. It looks a bit unnatural, so we get rid of that one. No flash fired, nothing really going on in that image, so it's not worth having. I always find it's better to submit a folder of images that are all different and quite exciting than a range of 200 images that are all very similar. I just don't think the album has as much impact as it should do then. So this is one where we've got DJ sort of mixing, the flash you can see here firing into the crowd. If I expose that, it's going to overexpose everything, so I've got to try and find the balance basically. I personally don't like it, so it's going to go in the bin. So that'll give you an idea of how I go through the process of editing my images. Then once I'm done with that, I then just go obviously File, I then go to Export, and then in terms of like the export in preference, obviously I'll give them a title. So this was a night called Habitat, so I'll do that. And then I'll always sort of export around about 4,000, so the images come out around about sort of 3 meg, 4 meg, somewhere along those lines, so they're sort of more than enough as HD standard. Then watermarks, so if you're working with a promoter and they want a watermark on their images, obviously you have to add that in to make sure that they get their branding out, and then we go to export. Now once they're exported, I then compress the file, I'll send them over to the promoter via WeTransfer, but then I'll also back up all of my images or all of the projects I've ever shot on this WD My Cloud. And this is just so at a later date, if for instance the promoter comes back to me and says, oh, can you get images from so and so, I will then go back and I can pull them off. And this folder needs a little bit of organising. As you can see, it's kind of all over the place, but that's sort of something for me to do in my downtime. So yeah, I'll store them here, and then this way if a promoter asks for something, I can go back and I can sort of dip in and I can get that. Now if you look at 2019 compared to 2018, there's a sort of obviously a year's worth of work. So yeah, there's a fair amount, and that's kind of how I do it. And the reason what I do with this process is the images that go into the WDMI folder, they are like the final images. So if it doesn't make the cut in the edit, then that image doesn't exist. I get rid of it, and that's just my process of like quality control. If I don't think it's good enough to send to the promoter, I won't keep it in the folder afterwards, because I just think it's a waste really. I'd rather always show my best work than work that's 20-30%. I'd always show stuff that's always 100% and represents me. So if the promoter comes back to me and says, oh, have you got any more images or anything like that, I said, no, these are the only images I've got. And kind of the people that I work with on a regular basis are used to that, and the expectation is I deliver, anything from 80 to 100 images on a night out. So you can see here I've got 217. I'll cull that down by, I'd imagine, 50-60%. So we'll end up with 100 odd images from that one night basically. But they will be, 100 good images as opposed to sort of all the same images. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how I go about editing. Unfortunately, I don't have any presets I can give you to help you out, and I just go about it, sort of on an individual basis. But my key bits to play with are clarity. I like to keep it sharp, exposure, and then also saturation, vibrance. And if I ever make anything too harsh like that, then obviously you use the noise reduction to do it, because what I find what clarity will do for you is you can find a lot more detail. So for instance, we're shooting on the Sony A7R II. If I put that back to there, by pulling up the clarity, you can see that we find all this detail here. So clarity is really good in nightclubs because you can pull some of that detail back by playing with the shadows. You can pull a little bit back as well, and it's just a case of balancing them all. But if you have any questions about sort of how I go about editing, or any tips on how you can go about editing, please do pop some comments below. Also link us to some of your work as well, because always keen to see other people's work, and just voice our opinion on it, and share it within the music photographer community. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will speak to you all again sometime soon. Take care. Bye.